All right. Looking forward to diving in. Thank you for everyone for attending. Really excited to kind of go through the developer experience report, our hot and spicy takes on it, and get through a demo of our platform at the end as well. So we'll start off with a quick introduction, go through the report at a high level, kind of cover our thoughts on developer experience and where it all fits into the broader ecosystem, and then go into a demo from there. So thank you everyone again, and looking forward to this. We'll start with some quick introductions. Anish, if you want to kick us off.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, like what Ganesh said. Really appreciate everyone taking the time to join today's webinar. So quick background on myself. My name is Anish. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Cortex. Been building Cortex now for the last few years, really based on previous experiences that we had as engineers. And so I used to work at Uber. It's a classic case of microservices gone wrong. Services on my team scaled pretty exponentially, and I really saw all the pain that came with that. In basic things like service ownership became difficult to understand. It was also really difficult to understand whether people were following best practices in reliability initiatives or platform initiatives. A lot of this used to be tracked in spreadsheets, or honestly just live in people's heads, which made it very difficult to understand where the areas of risk in the business were from a reliability, security, to a productivity perspective. And Uber is obviously on one end of the service complexity scale, but we just realized that every company that introduces services, or honestly, once you hit 50 to 70 engineers, especially, it becomes very difficult to kind of keep all of this context without having a platform like an IDP. So excited to dive in today, and yeah, appreciate all your time again.
And I'm Ganesh, one of the co-founders and CTO of Cortex. Similar to Anish, I was a software engineer before starting Cortex. And in my last job, saw the monolith to microservice journey from service one to hundreds plus by the time I left. And there were a lot of challenges, as you can imagine, everything from not knowing what services are out there and which teams own them, to getting people to care about standards, like Anish mentioned. And one of the things about moving to a microservice architecture is that developer experience is obviously top of mind. How do you make it easy for people to spin up services and maintain the right standards, and not introduce a new class of problems as microservices naturally do? And so that led us to start Cortex. And this is a really timely conversation because there's a lot of focus right now on developer experience and developer productivity and platform engineering and all the things that we see in the broader ecosystem. And so this report was really, really timely, and I think it is going to drive a really important conversation, especially in today's climate. So excited to dive in with you all. So with that said, we will dive into the report itself. Just a little bit of an overview on this. The report, as I'm sure you guys are aware, DZone, is an amazing partner, surveyed a global audience of software engineering professionals, generally targeting folks with around 20 years of experience. There were a little over 200 respondents, and the primary topics focused on developer productivity, platform engineering, and development workflows. And so that's kind of where the takeaways will focus on. I highly recommend taking a look at the report. Lots of interesting insights in there. So like I mentioned, for the agenda of today's talk, we will be starting with kind of the key takeaways from the report, our perspective on that. We want to spend some time talking about this idea of developer experience versus engineering excellence. What is developer experience? Where does it fit in? What do we mean by engineering excellence? And what are our hot takes around that? From there, we'll talk about the role of the IDP in enabling both. And then we'll give you a demo of Cortex so you can kind of see how all this stuff comes together. So let's dive into our takeaways.
Awesome. And so maybe a good place to start is just understanding platform engineering and how it's kind of exploded in both awareness and adoption across multiple different enterprises. Working at Cortex and having seen this market grow over these past 5 years, I think we've also seen the rise and adoption of platform engineering. And this is ultimately, when you think about platform engineering as a group, right, it's responsible, and customers of platform engineering are ultimately the developers, right? And one of the things that we often see is, as a developer in an enterprise today, there's just an intense amount of cognitive overhead, right? There is a lot of complexity when it comes to understanding what tooling your team is using, whether it's a bunch of internal tooling that you've built to solve specific use cases, or even all of the different integrations that the average engineering team has now dozens of different integrations spanning security, reliability, developer productivity. And so as an engineer, you're trying to figure out what am I supposed to build for the business, but then you also have a lot of these platform initiatives that are really critical for ultimately the business's success, right? And I think what we're also seeing is, apart from just focusing on DevOps practices, there's this idea of engineering excellence that platform engineering is especially embracing. And it starts not just with DevOps, but how do we build workflows that automate a lot of the toil the developers have to, whether it's manually creating a service or running a migration, infrastructure investments. But generally, platform engineering, I think, is advocating for how do we make our developers as productive as possible. And so looking at some of the survey results here, right? I think one of the things that one of the interesting observations is that the tooling really does matter, right? I think tooling and developer satisfaction are really, really closely interlinked. And if you think about like the general lifecycle of developer, I think the right tooling can either make or break the experience in a lot of cases. And on top of the tooling, I think a lot of it comes down to automation as well, right? If developers are having to manually go in and, like I remember some of the enterprises we're working with, the process to create a service is 23 different steps. And it involves going to ServiceNow and submitting a ticket request, and that gets routed somewhere else, and there's a manual approval. And, for developers, that can take, 6 to 8 months in some cases to spin up something as simple as an Azure pipeline. And so that obviously impacts developer satisfaction in a very meaningful way, and something to definitely place a really close eye to. And then apart from that, AI adoption, of course, is growing pretty rapidly. You're seeing most enterprises think about coding assistants, AI. We've seen a lot of tooling to do code reviews. Like a lot of the different pieces of the developer stack are being automated with AI, which I think is awesome to see. And then you're also starting to see a lot of companies think about productivity from a first-class standpoint. DORA metrics are obviously very, very popular space. Thinking about things like error rates, SLOs, these are kind of the most commonly used across all of the companies that were surveyed. Now, I think one of our big takes in working with the enterprises customers that we have today is that productivity is not really solved yet because focusing on developer experience is not enough, right? Developer experience is obviously very critical and plays a huge role in productivity. But when you think about engineering excellence as a broad concept, there's actually a lot of different factors that go into, are we driving productivity forward? And in the rest of this presentation, we're going to really try to break that down in a very tactical way about how do you actually think about productivity holistically and create a really strategic plan of improving the productivity of your development team. So how does platform engineering and internal development platforms relate, right? I think when you think about platform engineers, and a lot of their goal is how do we get adoption of the things that we're building to drive productivity for the engineering team, you're starting to see IDPs and internal developer platforms in particular really be synonymous with how platform teams are kind of driving those best practices and standards forward, right? And a lot of the platform engineering use cases that come with the internal development platforms around, automating dev test prod environments, streamlining CI/CD pipelines, abstracting away infrastructure provisioning. How do you take the complexity away from developers, let them focus on building software for the business, but still have them follow those best practices? And I think IDPs are becoming very, very synonymous with helping almost give you the framework as a platform engineer to make that happen in a way that doesn't antagonize engineering or get in the way. I think it's all about automation and how do you build those best practices into how developers think about their work, right? And common benefits of IDPs kind of really relate to that, right? Like driving better onboarding, easier to manage infrastructure, even cost insights, things like that, and driving security compliance initiatives. We've seen 60 to 70% reduction in the time it takes to get those done because IDPs give that framework of making it happen. And so at the end of the day, I think internal developer portals help take these benefits even one step further. I think it's one of those things where because you get this almost framework of understanding your systems and services, and IDPs then give you the ability to build on top of that data and kind of automate a lot of the manual processes that developers have to do on a daily basis. And the other interesting tidbit from the survey is that when it comes to collaboration and workflows, the overwhelming majority use today Slack and Teams to kind of have that team collaboration. But I think the interesting thing to note here is that we're still focused on the people and not systems, when the systems can play such a dramatic impact on a lot of these technical processes that engineers have to deal with on a daily basis. And so when we think about how do you actually abstract away complexity from a developer, it's very, very important to speak the same language as them, right? And that's where systems become incredibly critical is, like, yes, I can show my developers door metrics and I can show them these metrics, but at the end of the day, if I'm not meeting them where they are, if I'm not speaking the same language as them, if I'm not giving them context about the systems that they're working with, it's very, very hard to see the actual change that you want. And so the people and systems have to be interlinked, because without that, you're just not speaking the same language as your developers.
So to kind of summarize the takeaways, with the survey, we got confirmation that platform engineering has exploded, right? In the past 4 years, we know that organizations are putting developer experience front and center as an org-wide initiative, generally with the goal of driving that productivity forward. Complexity continues to explode. Developers have what we call the swivel chair, more and more tools in their stack, more responsibilities. The complexity of code base, the responsibilities of the developers themselves continue to increase, as well as the software ecosystem that they're operating in. And then finally, we know that developer platforms are increasing, focused on developer onboarding, infrastructure management, and so on. And this includes everything from infrastructure as code to homegrown platforms that stitch together best-of-breed capabilities across CI/CD and infrastructure provisioning and security and whatnot. And so the idea of these internal kind of PaaS type services or internal developer platforms continues to grow. And I think these takeaways are really important because they speak to something, I think, bigger than just developer experience, right? Organizations are trying to solve this idea of consistent experience, consistent practices around reliability and onboarding and infrastructure provisioning and reducing the complexity of the ecosystem. But I think what's missing here is the why. Like, why are teams and organizations so focused on reducing that complexity or building out these developer platforms? Like, yes, it's easy to say like, oh, it's going to make the experience better, but what is this in service of? And I think that's the thing that's missing in the conversation entirely. And so I think that's where we believe that it's important to shift the conversation past just developer experience to the idea of engineering excellence. And basically, the way we describe this is it's the alignment of technical practices. So you think about security, reliability, velocity, and efficiency. How do you align these technical practices and technical foundations to drive business outcomes? And so in order to think about this framing, you have to start with the business outcome first. Think about the engineering foundations and practices that are required to hit those business outcomes, and then break it down to its core components. The analogy I always give is like sales excellence, right? If you're a sales team, you're optimizing your lead flow and your conversion rates and the lifetime value of a customer, and that's how you drive growth, right? It's not just about the experience of the salesperson or kind of that first level of the onion. It's one more level underneath that. Like, you, by operating as a well-oiled machine, by operating at a high level of sales excellence, that's what leads to revenue across the organization. And so we need to think about engineering organizations the same way. How do we invest in the right foundations as an organization to drive that business outcome? And it just happens that developer experience is part of that. And so we'll talk about that for just a second. I think engineering excellence is, you can break it down as like the why, the what, and the how. The why is clear. I think it's really important to start with those business outcomes. By investing in the right engineering foundations, what is the business outcome we're trying to drive? And one of the things I want to flag is this is a constant conversation. Every time, as an engineering organization, we talk about, hey, why should we invest in reducing this tech debt over here? Talking about tech debt on its own is just like an abstract thing, doesn't actually drive forward any sort of behavioral change, right? Like, how do you go and convince leadership that like, hey, this thing is a thing that we should go and fix? It's always easier to talk about it from a business perspective. The debt here in this part of the code base is slowing down our ability to release this feature X, and that feature X has some sort of business outcome. Like we, as an engineering organization, have learned this, but it's a thing that we haven't really brought into the broader engineering foundation and platform engineering practice. So business excellence starts, most organizations are trying to work towards better innovation, right? How do we innovate more? How do we reduce our time to market? How do we do so in a way that is cost effective and we're being efficient with our resources and producing a high quality product and creating the right customer experience? Most organizations are solving either one or many of these kind of business outcomes at a high level, outside of like the actual product you're trying to build itself. The way to get there is by investing in the right foundations as an engineering organization, right? We talk about reliability, security, efficiency, and velocity as those kind of pillars of excellence. If we're building a reliable product, that drives better cost efficiency because our incident rates are going down, it improves the customer experience. By investing in security, we are again helping ourselves innovate more because we are reducing risk and we're building a better customer experience. By using our resources through things like modernization strategies and consistency of operations, we are reducing our costs, we're improving our efficiency, and we're helping ourselves move faster. And velocity is obviously top of mind for everyone, right? It's like, are we investing in the right tooling around Gen AI? Do we have the right quality control that is slowing us down? Do we have the right golden paths to help people move forward? And so these are the pillars of engineering excellence. This is the things that if we solve and build the right foundation, they will help us achieve those business outcomes. But then how do we actually do that? And that's where developer portals are coming in. And we like to talk about the 4 C's of developer portals. You need to think about visibility, right? Do your practitioners like developers, your central teams like SRE and security and platform engineers and leadership all have visibility into your software ecosystem. It's not enough to just have engineering metrics that your managers look at, or just have SLOs and dashboards that your SRE teams look at. The entire organization needs to be looking at the data and think about engineering organizations as a data-driven organization. The second thing here is continuous improvement. So how do we create a culture where things are not just good or bad, but it's a spectrum? How do we always say, how do we get better? How do we get better than we were last quarter, last week, and so on? And creating that culture of continuous improvement is really important. And I think this is really important, especially when it comes to platform engineering. When we think about developer platforms, right? It's not just, oh, our platform sucks today and I'm going to build the best platform ever. We know our platform is not great today and we're going to make incremental improvements until that platform solves all the things that we needed to solve. And we're going to continue getting better over there. You'll notice here that we call it developer experience as not an outcome of engineering, like as not a pillar of engineering excellence, but actually one of the enablers of engineering excellence. Developer experience is not the end all be all, right? Developer experience is a way to drive these kinds of outcomes, but it is a way to enable the outcomes that you care about. And the last thing here is clear ownership, right? Because you can define all the best practices you want in the world. You can define all the metrics you want to track. You can build the best platform. But if you don't have clear accountability over services and software assets, you're just screaming into the void. Like let's say you've rolled out a new platform capability and you want everyone to adopt this. It's a new CI platform you've built. Okay, I have 500 repos. Which teams are accountable for going and migrating those repos to use a new platform? If you don't know which team owns which repository, you're just kind of screaming into the void. And so starting with the foundation of ownership is really important. Now, kind of having defined what engineering excellence is, I want to very clearly break down the two. So engineering excellence is the alignment of strategy, the technical strategy, with the business outcomes. And what's really important to call out is it spans the entire life cycle. It's not just spinning up a new service, or it's not just operating that service in production. It's from architecture to incident response to spinning up those services and best practices. It's your inner loop, your outer loop. Engineering excellence is the entire lifespan. Like, how do we operate as an excellent organization? And that drives the outcomes that we care about. Developer experience, on the other hand, is really focused on optimizing developer workflows, right? So think about the tooling that they have available to them, the documentation, the CI/CD pipelines. How do we reduce friction and cognitive load? If you think back to the takeaways from the report, this is what we saw, right? A lot of people were still using Slack and Teams as their way to collaborate. We're seeing that the platforms are really focused on developer onboarding and making it easy to spin up infrastructure. So we're really focused on just developer friction. But the important thing is, just by reducing friction, that doesn't guarantee that you're driving the business outcomes you care about. Like, if what your business really cares about is improving innovation, does improving your reliability outcome or building a self-service path for creating new services actually drive towards the outcome that you care about. And so developer experience may be good, and like there are a lot of benefits, of course, like things like retention and satisfaction and with developers we know leads to better productivity, but are those two things connected? And so engineering excellence as a framing or a mindset basically helps you make sure that your engineering investments are focusing on business goals. So how does the developer friction and the developer's immediate work actually target and drive those business outcomes that you care about? And I'll give you this analogy that I really, really love. I like to say that developer experience is your ergonomic office chair, right? I'm sitting in a Herman Miller Aeron right now. I love it. It makes sure that I'm comfortable, make sure that 3 years from now, I don't have a ton of back problems because I sit in it for 8 hours a day. And it's great. Could I get my work done in a probably worse chair that's maybe not ergonomic or hunched over on my couch every day without a mouse and a monitor? Probably. It's going to lead to friction and bad outcomes later, but I can still write good code. I can still drive the business outcomes I care about. But by investing in developer experience, by investing in the right office chair, you're making sure that you're reducing friction, the longevity of your platform, the longevity of me as a developer, all holds true. And so these are all part of the overall outcome. You can have the most unhappy developer team that is producing business outcomes, but that has a cost associated with that. And so you want to make sure you're balancing developer experience as one aspect of your broader engineering excellence strategy. And I'll give you some very concrete examples of this. Like I said, developer experience enables acceleration across those verticals, right? So let's take security as an example. I want to make it really easy. We're trying to migrate away from developers having access to databases that they own for their services. Instead, that should be managed all through IAM, and we want to make sure that developers can access production databases when they need to, if they have the right approvals. And so the security team comes and says, I'm going to create a self-service workflow that developers can use to come in and request temporary credentials for production database. Yes, it's great developer experience, but it's in service of a security outcome. There's a very clear alignment between the developer experience and why that drives the security outcome that we care about. Or let's think about deployment UI. Like, hey, before somebody deploys something to production, I want to make sure that they follow a series of checks that ensures that this particular feature is ready to go out into production. You can bake this into your deploy workflow, right? Before something goes into deploy, you can have a series of automated checks that says, hey, you're ready to go or you're not. The alternative to this is probably a manual process. And we see this in a lot of enterprises where every feature has to go through a bunch of manual reviews and checks. And then finally they can go out, and that sucks. The friction is really bad, and that makes developers frustrated. But you can bake that into your developer deploy UI, which now is actually a great experience for developers, but is leading to the reliability outcome that you care about. And a couple other examples here, security and reliability, like project bootstrapping. A lot of platform engineering teams are really focused on like templates and project bootstrappers. But if you think about it just from like, I want to make it easy for developers to get started, you're actually not working towards that business outcome. By baking in your security concerns, your reliability concerns, like default security scanning and logging approaches and monitoring and so on, you're actually guaranteeing that the effort that you put into that project bootstrapper is driving the business outcome of reliability and security that you care about. The same thing with CI, right? Like you are rolling out a new CI pipeline that improves caching and build times and so on. Yes, it's a great developer experience. I can tell you from personal experience that sitting and waiting for a build that takes forever takes me out of my flow. It creates frustration and friction and so on. But it's also slowing down the business, right? It's preventing me from deploying more frequently, from shipping new features, and that over time degrades our ability to deliver as a business. And so by thinking about if there's an area of friction here that is slowing down the business, by improving that, I'm creating a better developer experience and driving that business outcome. Those two things align. Cost management with Terraform. Like, let's say you set up your Terraform pipeline to comment on an infrastructure as code PR, and it tells the developer, hey, this particular change is going to cost you $3,000 a month. Cool. Like, what does that do? For me as a developer, that it's a great developer experience, right? I know exactly at change time, without having to go through a review process, what is the impact of this? And now all of a sudden I'm thinking about cost directly as part of my development lifecycle with shifting that left. So it's a great developer experience, but it also has the outcome of driving down costs and improving efficiency. And so you can see here, by thinking about engineering excellence outcome, by thinking about like the pillars of engineering excellence, by thinking about the business outcomes, it actually gives me a framing to think about, hey, where should I actually focus my efforts from developer experience? And this is really common with product teams, right? If you think about any kind of social network or any sort of consumer-facing product, every product team has a North Star, right? They're working towards some key metric, and whether it's something like time spent on the newsfeed or number of reacts, there's a key metric that I care about, and I can actually work backwards from there and determine, okay, what are the investments I need to make to drive that outcome? And so developer experience should be the same thing. Like you start with the business outcome that I want to innovate more, I want to ship faster. You work backwards to say, what is the engineering excellence pillar that is slowing us down? Is it because we're not efficient enough? Is it because we have too many incidents and KTLO is taking up a ton of our time, and so we're not able to ship enough? And then you work backwards into, okay, what is the right developer experience that helps us unlock that vertical to the business outcome? And so developer experience is a way to enable those engineering excellence verticals rather than it being just a thing on its own. And I think that is the framing that has made it really challenging for the lack of that framing has made it really challenging for platform teams to get the success that they're looking for. Kind of jumping into Cortex. Now we've talked a little bit about developer experience and engineering excellence. We talked about those self-service workflows a lot. Cortex as a developer portal allows you to build self-service workflows. So for example, things like provisioning a new service, getting a new AWS account spun up, getting those just-in-time credentials for a database or your Vault access. Cortex allows you to define those workflows in very easy self-service ways, and you can bake in your best practices directly into those workflows. And we'll talk about that in the demo as well. And the other thing that's really unique about Cortex is engineering intelligence. We talked a lot about being metric-driven and data-driven. So Cortex as an IDP actually bakes in metrics like your DORA metrics, your space metrics, your cycle times. And the important thing to note here is that these metrics exist in the portal not because it's just a way to measure productivity, but it's a way to find bottlenecks, right? If we know that we are trying to drive the business outcome of shipping more, I can go in and very quickly see in the IDP that, hey, this particular team is spending a lot of time on incidents, and that is what's slowing them down from shipping more. And so by investing in the right incident processes, by investing in the right production readiness processes, we can actually drive those business outcomes and use the IDP as a way to drive those outcomes. So you can kind of think of it almost as a way for you to investigate your own bottlenecks as an organization and drive the right outcomes you care about. And so from here, I want to give you guys a demo of Cortex and what it looks like and how Cortex can help accelerate those developer experience and engineering excellence outcomes as a platform. I want to start with workflows. A lot of folks are really interested in learning about those self-service capabilities. There's a question here, actually two questions regarding Backstage in the chat that I want to quickly cover before I dive in. Cortex is not based on Backstage. Cortex is actually an alternative to Backstage, and we've migrated quite a few customers from Backstage for a variety of reasons, and I'll talk about that during the demo. Backstage is more of a framework to build an IDP as opposed to an out-of-the-box IDP, which means you need to kind of go in and investigate and invest your own time in building out things like self-service capabilities and best practices and ownership and all the things that matter. And so you probably could build out if you had enough time and resources and technical chops and the ability to get that buy-in from leadership. But Cortex actually launched to the general public about a year before Backstage launched. And so we've learned a lot about what makes developer portals successful. And we've baked a lot of those practices directly into the portal itself. There's another question here around a migration utility. We actually do have a native migration utility to port from Backstage to Cortex. And what's really cool about Cortex, we actually have a plugin system very similar to Backstage, where you can build your own plugins and port your own plugins, custom plugins from Backstage if you have them to Cortex as well. So that can be done in less than 5 minutes. Talking about workflows, so and feel free to drop any additional questions in the chat. I'm happy to answer those as well. There are, when we think about workflows and self-service, I think a lot of IDPs and platforms think about self-service as just infrastructure provisioning or service bootstrapping or kind of like a very narrow view of the world. When we think about self-service, we think about self-service and developer experience in the lens of engineering excellence, like we talked about. So we built workflows in a way that actually allows you as a team to codify your best practices directly into the workflow and integrate with a variety of tools. So it can be everything from bootstrapping a new service to standard incident response practices to deploying a service to getting temporary credentials for your vault and so on. So the way this works is every workflow actually is exactly what the name sounds like. You're able to wire up a variety of steps together. So for example, I can make API calls to internal or external tools. I can take those responses and dynamically generate user inputs. So I can ask the user for information. I can run code scaffolding using cookie cutter with your own custom templates. And you can actually chain multiple scaffolders together. So for example, you might have one scaffolder for things like your Spring Boot starter. You might have a different scaffolder for your Helm chart. You might have a different scaffolder for Terraform modules. And you can actually wire all those things up together in a single workflow, which actually makes it very, very powerful. You can even do things like pause for manual approval. So for example, I might say, hey, before this particular workflow moves on, I want to pause for an approval from the security team and continue from there. And actually, I want to show you guys a more interesting workflow that kind of showcases this capability. So give me a second as I pull this up. So this is an example of a self-service workflow for project bootstrapping. So here we're asking the user first for information about the service name, the language they want to use. So we're giving them 3 options they can start with, and then which kind of backing database they want to use. And you can customize all this stuff yourself. From there, we automatically generate the name of the service, its slug that we want to use. And then based on the language that the user defined, we're going down 3 paths. If they chose Python, we're going to scaffold a Python service for them. We'll create a new entry in Artifactory. And then from there, based on the database they chose, we can provision the database using Terraform and then pause for approval. We're going to say, hey, before this workflow continues, I need the security team to approve this. And if you're using a CMDB or an ITSM tool, you can actually integrate with that too, like ServiceNow, for example. And you can have that integrated and create the right records in there as well. So you can see how workflows can allow you to create really complex self-service experiences using a combination of things like code scaffolding and running Azure pipelines and CI pipelines directly in a single workflow. So from a developer perspective, all they have to do, come in, click a button, and it will ask the user for all the information that they need, orchestrate between all the tools in your ecosystem, and then 5 minutes later, the developer comes back and they have a repo ready to go, or they have their infrastructure ready to go. A question in here, can you use Bitbucket Cloud or Bitbucket Data Center, or both? You can use both, and you can actually use multiple instances of both in Cortex, and something that's really unique to Cortex. So you can have multiple instances of Bitbucket Cloud, multiple instances of Bitbucket Data Center, and mix and match the two. So a lot of our customers will actually use this to help them migrate between the different platforms. Or if you've done a lot of acquisitions, for example, and you have multiple groups using different tools, you can bring all those things together into the single platform. Cool. So that's a little bit about workflows. So workflows are really, really extendable. You can use them to do all kinds of things, including but not limited to project bootstrapping and self-service capabilities. And what's great is we don't expect you to replace your platform with Cortex. Most of our customers have a variety of tools in their platform today. So think about infrastructure as code through something like Terraform or Spacelift. They have CI/CD through something like Jenkins or GitHub Actions or Circle CI. They have IAM policy set and so on. And the beauty about workflows in Cortex is you can actually stitch all those things together and create a single entry point for developers so that they don't have to become experts in the different capabilities of your platform. Cortex can help you abstract that away, bring a human into the loop, and get them to their desired land very, very easily. And that's the magic of workflows. The other part of Cortex is the catalog. One of the things that we hear is like, workflows are really great at spinning up new services and new capabilities. But what about all the things that you already have today? What about your existing services that people are creating using your self-service workflows? You don't want those things to just disappear into the void. You want to make sure that you have visibility into those things. So for example, as you roll out new best practices, how do you make sure that things are not drifting? If there's an incident, let's say I'm a developer, I get paged at 2 a.m. for some service named after a Game of Thrones character. Where do I go to figure out, hey, what does the service do? Who owns it? Is it my service that's affected? Is it Anish's service that's affected? Where do I even start investigating this? And so the catalog is actually a really powerful way of driving those things by surfacing information from a variety of different tools in a single place. And so, for example, you're seeing the service catalog. So immediately we have a whole bunch of information for things like Is the service healthy, being surfaced from Datadog, New Relic, or your APM tool? Incidents coming from your incident management tool. And if I click into one of these services, there's a variety of really cool things here. So I understand very quickly, what does the service do? Which team owns the service? Where can I contact them? Where is this deployed? How many vulnerabilities does the service have? Is the service healthy? When was it deployed? And what's awesome about Cortex compared to something like a Backstage is all these integrations are native. So you give Cortex an API key and we'll ingest all this information and automatically surface this directly in the catalog. And it makes it very, very easy for this to be an entry point in a single pane of glass into your broader ecosystem. The other important thing to note is ownership. We talk a lot about ownership. With ownership, Cortex actually integrates with our HRIS tool like Workday, your identity provider like Okta or Entra ID. And we can ingest your teams and team members into Cortex automatically and keep that in sync. Or you can manage your teams and team members manually or mix and match those two approaches. What this allows us to do is actually flag things like orphan services. Every one of us has run into this case before where there's some critical service and you're trying to figure out who owns the thing. It turns out that the person working on that repository left the company 6 months ago. Now nobody knows anything about that service. So where did you go? How do you prevent things like that? Cortex makes that very easy because we can flag to orphan services. We can actually automatically reassign services. So you can say, hey, this particular service is part of this product feature. And this product feature is owned by Anish's team. So Anish's team owns all the microservices and repos and pipelines that are related to that product feature. And if anything changes, it'll automatically inherit that ownership to its children. The other really cool thing, and this is a little sneak preview of something we're gonna announce, is Cortex has actually built a proprietary ownership model trained on thousands and thousands of repositories that can tell you with a 95% accuracy rate exactly which team owns a repository. And this is something that is really unique to Cortex, and we're built in partnership with a lot of our customers. And so you can actually get started with Cortex in less than 5 minutes, import your repos, and we can tell you instantly exactly which team owns which repository. And so ownership is actually not even a question anymore of a human process. You can use AI and machine learning to drive ownership across your ecosystem. I'm really excited for that as well. There's a question in here I quickly want to answer. Is it SaaS or self-hosted? Cortex is a SaaS product. You can use a kind of private managed version of Cortex in your own environment if you need to. And a lot of the integrations can be run using an agent-based model. So you actually don't have to, if you have self-hosted tools, like for example, a self-hosted GitLab or a self-hosted Bitbucket, you can use our Cortex agent, run that in your environment, and that allows Cortex to connect to those integrations without exposing any kind of holes in your network. And so we're actually building that on top of the Sneak broker. So it's an open source product. So you can use your self-hosted integrations with Cortex, even if you're using our SaaS platform. Some of the other things I want to quickly highlight here, Cortex is a really cool thing like this event timeline. So when there's an incident, I can come into Cortex and very quickly see exactly what's changed for that service in the last 3 hours. So I got paged, I jump into Cortex, I see that there was a deploy 3 hours ago. We released a bug fix, and then an incident got triggered, and so that's why I got alerted. And then I can actually come in here and say, okay, well, is it my service or is it a different service that's the problem? It looks like one of the dependencies that I depend on also has problems, and so there could be something that's globally affecting our ecosystem. And so I can quickly go in here and say, hey, you know what? It's not my service. I'm going to go and page Nikhil because he's the owner of this other service that's affected right now. There's 3 monitors that are warning, so let me loop him into the incident channel. And so through the service catalog, through the integrations, we're able to make it very easier for you to find the right information when it matters most. Cortex also has native integrations with the hyperscalers, so your cloud providers like AWS, GCP, Azure, and a lot of our customers even track things like private data centers and their own databases and infrastructures hosted on their own data centers. And so you can catalog all those things inside of Cortex and relate those things to each other in very interesting ways. Kind of moving on, the last couple of things I wanted to show here before we kind of wrap up is scorecards. So scorecards are very, very important. When we think about things like developer experience and engineering excellence, it's very easy to say like, hey, we want to make it easy for people to spin up new services. But is that really enough? What happens when that service is ready to go to production? How do you guarantee that that service is ready to go to production? And how do you hold all of your existing services to the same set of standards? And how do you do that on an ongoing basis, right? When we think about production readiness, again, that's not a one-time thing. A lot of organizations treat production readiness as, I created a new service, I'm going to go through a production readiness process, SRE gives me a stamp, and then I'm good to go. And we never review that service again. But things change, right? New requirements come in, the stack drifts, maybe people leave the team. How do I know that those services are still meeting those standards over time? And how are we pushing people in the right direction? And so one of the examples here is a service maturity scorecard. And so in a service maturity scorecard, you can actually see all the services in my catalog have been mapped and given a grade. So, we try to gamify this, right? It's not just a, hey, Anish, your service sucks, or hey, Anish, your service is great, but it's more about, hey, Anish, your service is doing well. Here's how you can get better. Here's how we get better as an organization. And so you can break down these scorecards into levels. So every scorecard is broken down into multiple levels. So in this case, I have bronze, silver, and gold. You can do A, B, C, D, F, good, better, best. Really depends on your organization. But every single level is then made up of rules. And so in this example, my bronze level is, in order to meet the bronze level, you need to have a README file and you need to have owners. Really simple. But from there, I might say, okay, well, in order to meet the next level, you need to have automated unit testing, you need to have good code coverage, your on-call practices need to be following our standards, and so on. And what's really powerful here is you can actually query all of the data that's in the catalog. So all the integrations that we have, you're able to query and very quickly build scorecards. So even non-technical users can come in here, or even people that don't own the IDP can come in and build their own scorecards. So with Cortex, a lot of people actually build scorecards with their security team, with their SRE team, with their cloud infra and platform teams, and even folks like TPMs are building scorecards to track things like migrations. And so a very quick example of what that looks like, I can come in here and I can say, hey, this scorecard only applies to production services that are tier 1. And I can come in here and select a rule. So for example, let's say I want to make sure that services don't have, have less than 5 critical vulnerabilities, and specifically focusing on Java services that are fixable. And I can say, you got to have less than 5 of those. Really simple. Your security team can come in and build a scorecard rule really easily. Or you can actually use our language and come in and build a scorecard by, for example, directly diving into the data from Sneak and then saying, hey, not just you have 5 critical vulnerabilities or less, but you have less than 5 critical vulnerabilities that are, and you have to make sure that you're remediating them within 6 weeks of disclosure date. And so Cortex makes it very, very easy to build those scorecards and standards and enforce those across the organization. The other thing about scorecards is, especially when it comes to platform engineering, you can use it to track things like migrations. So, hey, AWS is end-of-lifing Postgres versions or Lambda Node.js runtimes. I need to make sure everyone is updating before there's an incident as a result of that. And so you can actually come in here and use Cortex and scorecards to drive those kind of migrations. So rather than 15 spreadsheets and tons of meetings trying to track this stuff down, you're going to let Cortex do that through scorecards and initiatives, where Cortex will automatically send notifications and create Jira tickets and ADO work items for you and drop them in the right places. So we can say, hey, Anish, your services, you have 4 Lambda functions that you own that have not upgraded to the latest Node.js runtime. And if you don't remediate those within 6 weeks, there's going to be an incident here. And so we can use Cortex to automatically track those things down, which is really, really powerful. One of my favorite parts about scorecards is the reporting. So a lot of you are probably thinking like, hey, where does leadership fit in here? If I'm a VP of engineering, if I'm a CTO, how do I get them to buy into the IDP? How do I get them to care about the scorecards and all the work that we're putting into the platform here? And the reporting is really important because that means that your leaders have a vested interest and they actually get value out of the IDP as well. And so one of the examples we have here is the bird's eye report. So when I think about something like production readiness, as a CTO, I don't care about all the 100 microservices that we have. I just want to know, are we actually moving forward in the path of production readiness? Are we actually making progress in the things that we care about? And so I can come here and very quickly, aggregate things like, I want to roll this up by team. I want to see from a leadership perspective, are we actually making progress in the right direction? And then I can drill down to the individual services and say, hey, these are the services that we should focus on. These are the things that we care about as a platform team so that we can go and invest in the right capabilities to make sure that we're making progress on our production readiness process. And so the right reporting in your IDP is really important. And we see this a lot with failed IDP initiatives is they're too focused on just developers or developer experience. But by reframing it around engineering excellence, you think about hey, what does our leadership care about? How do we help our leaders get value out of the IDP as well? Because then that creates a feedback loop of, hey, we're not making progress on production readiness, and I know this from a bird's eye report. What are the right processes and practices we need to instill across the organization to drive that? Hey, we need to invest in platform engineering so that we're baking in these practices from day one in our platform capabilities and our self-service golden paths. And then the leaders can kind of come in and see, hey, are we actually making progress on those things as well? And so creating that flywheel effect is really important. And so when you're thinking about an IDP, when you're thinking about developer experience, don't forget the leadership as a persona, because you need to make sure that they're bought into the entire flywheel in order for IDPs and developer experience initiatives to succeed. Last but not least, engineering intelligence. So Cortex actually helps you measure the impact of this. Let's say you've invested in the right capabilities on your platform. You've built all the right self-service tools. You've built the right scorecards, and you're driving progress towards production readiness or security standards. You're shifting these things left. Are we actually having the impact that we care about? How do I understand that? How do I understand where the bottlenecks are? And so with Cortex, I can actually measure things like DORA metrics and cycle time and where teams are spending time on keeping the lights on or feature development and so on. And so as an engineering leader, as a team lead, as a manager, as a platform team, I can actually use Cortex and engineering intelligence to figure out what are the bottlenecks? Where are we facing the most pain and friction right now? And how do I use that to go and build the right self-service developer experience capabilities to solve those problems? And so now as an organization, we can be much more data-driven, right? It's not just, hey, I think that developers are feeling friction in these areas. I can actually measure that and drive progress in the places that we care about and measure the impact of that through engineering intelligence. And so this is kind of how we think about the entire end-to-end life cycle of where a portal fits in. We talked a lot about developer experience and platform engineering in the current state of the world, but without a portal, it's impossible to tie all those things together. How do you make sure that you're creating the right experiences for developers? How do you make sure that those experiences are discoverable for your end users? How do you know that they're driving towards the right business outcomes and the right engineering excellence outcomes? And the portal makes it very easy to drive all those outcomes that you care about and make sure that you are serving the developers, your central teams like platform and SRE, and your leadership in service of those business outcomes. And I think that's where the future of portals is really going to go. I want to make sure that we have some time for questions. I know there's 10 minutes left. There's 2 questions in here that I want to talk about. Before I jump into questions, I wanted to highlight we are hosting quite a few summits in a variety of regions to continue the conversation around engineering excellence. These are exclusive, invite-only events for leaders and senior ICs to help them build more high-performing engineering organizations. So a variety of your peers from across different industries, from folks who are experts in IDPs, from folks who are experts in platform engineering, are going to be at these engineering excellence summits. So we'll drop a link in the event so you guys can check those out. We have one in New York coming up. Anish will be at that one. Both of us will be at the one in London. We have an exclusive dinner in Amsterdam. We have another event in San Francisco we'll be at, and another one in Boston we'll be at as well. And so would love to see you guys at the Engineering Excellence Summits and really push forward the conversation, not just around developer experience, but around engineering excellence as a whole. And so there's going to be a lot of great conversations and workshops at these as well. And we'll open it up for questions now. There's a few in the chat, and we'll kind of just go through those based on the votes. The first one is the transition from developer experience to engineering excellence is intriguing, but is this masking deeper issues in how teams communicate their value? Absolutely. I think one of the things that platform teams, or even like I mentioned earlier, teams that are focused on tech debt or new engineering capabilities really struggle with is talking about the value. And I think developer experience has been really focused on productivity as an outcome, and that's made it really hard, right? Because developer experience teams focus on things like DORA metrics or space metrics, it's losing a layer of value that helps them communicate to the engineering leaders or the business leaders. If you tell your CEO, hey, we're investing in developer experience and our DORA metrics are looking great, what does that mean to a CEO? But talking about it from the perspective of, hey, in our shareholder meeting this last quarter, we really talked about our need to innovate more and ship faster. Like we need to embrace AI and ship capabilities to the market really quickly. And by investing in the right platform capabilities and the right developer experience, we have reduced the time it takes to create a new service that enables AI capabilities from 6 weeks down to 3 hours. And that is helping our teams move faster, and we've released 3 new features as a result. And you can see here, yes, productivity is implied in this conversation, but we're talking the language of the business. We're not talking the language of developer productivity. We're talking about how developer experience drove a business outcome. And so changing how you talk about value is really important. You want to talk about engineering excellence to the engineering leaders and business outcome to the broader organization. Productivity is just one part of it. It's a very small slice. Productivity misses the forest for the trees. And talking about the business outcome is the best way to drive value and talk about your value as a platform team. Another question here is, if platform teams become engineering excellence teams, how do we prevent the dilution of specialized developer experience expertise? This is a really interesting question because, I think over the last 2 years, we've actually seen a gradual transition from developer experience teams to platform engineering teams, and they all kind of become part of the same broader organization. And I think what we're seeing in the market is actually there's a shift towards engineering excellence organizations that are kind of supersets of cloud infra, of developer experience, of platform engineering, and so on. And so I think we're actually going to see more things like centers of excellence or heads of engineering excellence, and kind of these organizations rolling up to that. But how do we prevent this developer experience expertise from going away if we're really focused on engineering excellence as the outcome? And I think it's by, again, reframing that conversation. You cannot serve those business outcomes without developer experience. It's just like I mentioned, the ergonomic office chair. You need that ergonomic office chair in order to drive the right outcomes you care about. And so in the same way, developer experience expertise actually becomes a core skill set for the entire platform engineering organization. And so I think that's the way to think about it. Is you can't think about developer experience as like a separate skill set. Your entire engineering excellence organization, your entire organization should have developer experience as a thing that they all care about and they all build as a skill set. It's like it's the same way we think about shifting things left. Like, we want our developers to think security first. We want our developers to think cost first. Why is developer experience anything different? So I think that's the way we think about that. A question that came in, do you add scorecards to every object in the portal, or these consistent scorecards, or tailored for every workflow or golden path? I think the best way to think about scorecards is to think about the business outcome. So for example, we think about, hey, we want to build a better customer experience. And one of the pillars of doing that is reliability. So we're going to create a scorecard really focused on reliability. So production readiness is a thing that we care about. So we're going to create a production readiness vertical that could apply to a variety of objects. It could apply to services. It could apply to infrastructure. It could apply to features. But the outcome is production readiness. And the reason this matters and why scorecards are so important is because it changes the language from just a normal metric to a behavior or a practice that we care about. And so talking about, hey, we want to drive reliability. We believe production readiness will drive those outcomes. Here's where we are from a production readiness standpoint, and how we're going to drive the outcome is a way to frame that conversation. And so you want to think about it from the perspective of the outcome, the pillar, and then the objects that applies to. And so usually our customers will have somewhere between 10 to 15 scorecards, usually around production readiness, security, operational excellence, and a variety of migrations and compliance initiatives as well. So that's generally how we think about scorecards. Let's really think about the behavior and the inputs to that equation as well. Let's see, some other questions. Platform teams are evolving. Is there a hybrid model that kind of focuses on technical innovation and business impact? I don't think about those as a hybrid model. I think about those things as the same thing. Technical innovation is always in the service of a business outcome, right? If we let's zoom back almost 50 years, right? Like, let's think about the invention of the transistor, right? You had Bell Labs is really focused on innovation, but it was always in service of a business outcome. Switchboards were getting really complex for telephone operations, and they needed a better way to run those switchboards, right? And the way they thought about that was, we have a business outcome. We need to scale up our switchboards. We need to scale up our operations centers. And in order to do that, by investing in science and technology, we'll get there. And that's how the transistor was invented. but it was always from the perspective of how do we drive the business outcome? And so even something as grand as a transistor started from the business outcome. And so you can never really break apart technical innovation from business impact. Platform engineers should think about that as well. How do we push forward the boundaries of innovation, of platform engineering, of developer experience, but tying it to technical innovation or tying it to business impact will actually drive the innovation that we care about, because it forces you to think in those constraints. And the more that those constraints you have, the more you end up innovating and having targeted innovation as well. And it helps you make the case for more time and energy and resources for those types of things as well. And so you have to think about business impact as a framing of technical innovation as well. I know we have a couple minutes left. I just want to thank everyone for the time. I hope this was helpful. If you take anything away from this conversation, I would challenge you to think about engineering excellence as the framing of developer experience. Developer experience and productivity are interlinked. I think developer productivity is interesting but misguided. I think developer experience is important, but just one part of the equation. You want to think about engineering excellence. You want to think about the business impact. And you want to think about, as an engineering organization, how do we invest in the right foundations to drive the outcomes that we care about? So think about developer experience from that perspective. Think about the metrics, not just from a developer productivity standpoint, but from a organizational impact standpoint. And think about engineering excellence as a way to drive that. And platform engineering is very well situated to drive those outcomes. I want to thank DZone for the amazing report that prompted these conversations and creating and helping create the right conversation around this. I want to thank everyone who attended today's webinar and all the questions in the chat. I hope this was helpful. I hope to see you all at the Engineering Excellence Summits. There's a link here, and we'll follow up with that link to the Engineering Excellence Summits as well. Again, there's summits in almost every single region. We hope to see you there. And if you have questions or additional things that you want to ask us, feel free to add us on LinkedIn. You can find both of us under our names, and feel free to connect with us there. And more than happy to have a conversation with you all. And so thank you, everyone. Hope this was helpful, and hope to see you at the next one.
Thank you so much.